It's not just another yellow Chevy. It's the yellow Chevy, the one that outlived its era, its creators, and almost every other piece of Hollywood metal. You've seen it before, even if you don't remember where. Maybe it flashed by in a grainy midnight rerun roaring through the streets with Tony Danza behind the wheel. Maybe you saw it on a magazine cover in your dad's garage or in a Diecast display case glowing beneath the dust. That car, the 1957 Chevy known as Project X, isn't just a machine. It's a myth that refused to die. Born as a 250 used car built by dreamers, then reborn on screen as a movie icon, Project X has lived a dozen lives. Magazine mule, Hollywood star testbed showpiece, even a lightning-quiet electric experiment. And tonight, we're diving deep into its story. 20 facts so strange, so unpredictable, that even the people who built it could barely believe what happened. This isn't just about horsepower or chrome. It's about legacy obsession and the one car that somehow became more human than machine. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear gets weird. 20 Tubbies was a set. Remember that neon-lit drive-in from the Hollywood nights? The heart of every scene where Duke parked Project X and life seemed like one endless summer night. It wasn't real. Tubbies Drive-In, the film's main hangout, was nothing more than a burned-out A&W root beer stand on Van Nuys Boulevard in California. The production crew rebuilt just enough of its charred shell to make it camera-ready. Up front, it looked alive. Bright signs, fresh paint, glowing windows. But if you walked around back, the illusion fell apart. Scorched walls, melted metal, still reeking of smoke. For 3 short weeks of filming, it was the epicenter of teenage rebellion. Then it vanished. Yet somehow 40 years later, hot rodders still cruise past that spot taking photos, where Tubbies never really existed. 19. The most famous 57 Chevy ever among car lovers. Project X isn't just a name, it's a legend. More people can identify this single yellow 1957 Chevy than any other of its kind. It's not the prettiest, not the fastest, and certainly not the most expensive. But it's the one everyone knows. Since 1965, Project X has appeared in magazines, movies, car shows, and YouTube videos. Decade after decade, it's carried the same name, the same yellow glow, and the same spirit. Kids who saw it in Hollywood nights now show it to their grandchildren. It's not just a car anymore, it's the universal symbol of a 1957 Chevy hot rod. 18. Smoke on camera. Watch the street race scene against the Cobra and look closely after Duke shifts gears. That puff, you see, not tire smoke, engine smoke. During filming, the blower's lower pulley broke loose, spraying coolant and oil everywhere. The engine was wounded, but the crew had no time or money to reshoot. So Tony Danza just kept driving, keeping his cool, while the car literally coughed beneath him. The tension you see on his face isn't acting, it's real fear. The car was dying, and the cameras were rolling. That broken blower became part of its legend, a scar from its movie career that fans still talk about today. 17. The clone car movement. After the movie hit theaters, something wild happened. Everybody wanted their own Project X. From teenagers to pro builders, people started painting their 57 Chevys, the same yellow bolting on blowers, and trying to recreate Duke's car. It was an epidemic of tribute builds, and it never stopped. Today, car shows and social media are flooded with Project X clones. Some are perfect down to the last bolt. Others reimagine what Project X could have been. There are likely more clones of this car than of the General Lee or Eleanor, because unlike those, this one feels reachable. 16. Diecast cult status. Then came the diecast craze. When ACME Collectibles released the 1/18 scale Hollywood Nights project, X collectors lost their minds. The first batch sold out in hours, the second the same, the third gone. Soon 70 models were selling for $400. For many people, that tiny piece of yellow metal was their first encounter with Project X. They Googled it, found the history, watched the film, and became hooked. That's how you know a legend has truly crossed generations, when even a toy version carries the same magic as the real thing. 15. The big block comeback. In a world shifting to electric cars and silent streets, Project X roared back with a vengeance. In 2023, Hot Rod Magazine dropped a 632 cubic inch big block under its hood, the biggest naturally aspirated engine Chevrolet had ever built. 104 horsepower, 900 pound-feet of torque, no turbos, no superchargers, just raw, unfiltered muscle. It was a rebellion on four wheels, a middle finger to the idea that hot rodding was dying. The car that once tested futuristic electric power came back breathing fire, shaking the ground, and reminding everyone that madness still has a place in motoring. When it started, alarms went off down the block. The exhaust thunder wasn't just noise. It was defiance. 14. The brief electric experiment. But before that monstrous comeback, Project X went silent. At the 2021 SEMA show, it rolled in under electric power. No rumble, no smoke, just eerie quiet. Chevrolet had fitted it with an experimental E-crate motor. 340 horsepower, instant torque, near perfect efficiency. To purists, it was blasphemy. To innovators, it was genius. And the truth, it worked better than expected. It hit 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds quicker than many of its gas-powered incarnations. But Project X was never about logic or evolution. It was about emotion. So after 2 years, they ripped out the motor and went back to roaring gasoline fury. Because silence might be powerful, but it isn't Project X. 13. The retro movie look Redux. When GM modernized, the car fans revolted. It doesn't look like Duke's Ride anymore, they cried. So the team listened and reimagined the Hollywood Nights version. They couldn't undo the updated chassis, but they could bring back the look, the lowered stance, the mismatched tires, the glint of chrome under that signature yellow paint. They even matched the original hue, that slightly faded golden yellow that shimmered under the Van Nuys streetlights. It wasn't perfect. The modern LS engine didn't sound like the old small block, but visually, it was magic, a bridge between nostalgia and now. 12. $1 million reinvention. In 2007, General Motors took official custody of Project X. They didn't just restore it, they rebuilt it from atoms. Every component was documented, photographed, and redesigned. They installed Corvette suspension, a 4-link rear setup, Detroit speed components, empowered it with a 620 horsepower 427 crate engine. The rebuild reportedly cost nearly $1 million. From a 250 car to a 7-figure masterpiece, it was immaculate. Maybe too immaculate. Fans said it lost its grit, its garage-built soul. The bruises and imperfections that made Project X feel human were gone. It had become too perfect, too polished, too corporate. Even GM eventually realized legends shouldn't shine too bright. 11. Tony Nancy's yellow joke. There's a blink and you'll miss it scene in the Hollywood Nights where someone points to Duke's freshly painted car and asks, "Is that piss yellow?" The painter, played by the real-life customizer, Tony Nancy, fires back, "No, it's Tony Nancy yellow." That line wasn't in the script. It was Tony's spontaneous joke about his own signature color, a hue so iconic that only the elite hot rodders could afford it. It was self-aware, meta, and perfect. The painter in the movie was actually painting the real car using his real color and joking about it on camera. That one throwaway line made Tony Nancy yellow immortal and forever tied it to Project X. 10. The magazine star turned movie actor. Before the Hollywood Nights ever rolled a camera, Project X was already a celebrity, the kind born not from red carpets, but from the ink and grease of popular hot rodding magazine. For 15 years, the car appeared monthly, showcasing every experiment, imaginable new engines, carburetors, blowers, paint jobs, and bad ideas that somehow became genius later. When the movie needed a hot rod that screamed authenticity, loud, rebellious, and attainable, Project X was the perfect fit. Billy Davis, a car-finding legend, pitched it instantly. It wasn't a show queen. It looked like something a real mechanic might drive. Hot rodders recognized it immediately. That's Project X, they whispered in theaters. Everyone else. They just saw a cool yellow Chevy. The movie gave the car a new audience. Hollywood didn't make Project X famous. It just made its fame undeniable. 9. A 60s story with a 70s soul. The movie was set in 1965, but Project X didn't belong there. Its stance was too low, its wheels too wide, its blower too aggressive, all wrong for the mid-60s, but perfectly right for 1979. That's what made it work. It looked like a dream of 1965, filtered through the neon haze of the late 70s. Too clean, too shiny, too cinematic to be real. It was nostalgia, built by people who were already nostalgic. For a time, they'd romanticized. In that way, Project X wasn't a prop. It was a time traveler embodying how memory distorts reality, until what we remember feels better than what really happened. 8. The Car Hunter. Behind the legend. Billy Davis wasn't a producer, actor, or stunt driver, but without him, Project X might never have been in the movie at all. He was Hollywood's go-to car detective, the man who could find anything with wheels for a film set. When producers said they needed a yellow 57 Chevy that looked fast, sounded mean, and felt authentic, Davis didn't even pause. Project X, he said. He tracked it down, negotiated the deal, and delivered the car that would define the Hollywood nights. And he didn't stop there. Davis also sourced the Cobra, the 40 Ford, and half the background cruisers that filled the film's iconic street scenes. His touch gave the movie its pulse. Without him, Duke might have driven something forgettable, and history would have lost its most famous 57 Chevy moment. 7. The real Cobra opponent. That street race between Duke's Project X and the rich guy's Cobra. It wasn't movie magic. It was real. The Cobra used on set was an authentic Shelby, not a replica. In 1979, those cars were already rare and expensive, and the owner reportedly stood on the sidelines white-knuckled every time Tony Danza revved the Chevy beside it. The Cobra was faster, much faster. To make the race look even, they filmed at partial throttle using clever angles and editing. Every run was a gamble. No stunt doubles, no CGI. Just two genuine cars burning real rubber and real fear behind the wheel. By the end of the shoot, the Cobra's clutch was cooked, its tires shredded, but both cars survived. That authenticity is why the scene still hits today. Two legends clashing for real with everything on the line. 6. On-set chaos and last-minute fixes. Everyone on set remembers one thing the day Project X broke. Mid-scene, the lower blower pulley exploded. Coolant sprayed everywhere, steam clouded the camera lenses, and Tony Danza thought the engine was going to catch fire. There was no backup car, no time for repairs. The crew had one choice: fix it just enough to limp through filming. Zip ties, safety wire, JB Weld prayer, they used it all. The engine never ran quite the same after that, sounding rougher, meaner, more alive. That moment turned a polished prop into a battle-worn hero. The sound of that wounded motor became part of its myth, a reminder that sometimes imperfection is what makes something legendary. 5. The movie Wheelstand trick. You remember that moment. Duke slams the throttle and Project X lifts its front end toward the sky tires, clawing at the pavement like a beast unleashed. Except that never really happened. Physics said no. The car's balance was all wrong for a wheelstand engine, too light suspension, too soft rear, too heavy. But Hollywood doesn't care about physics. Hollywood cares about spectacle. So the crew cheated brilliantly. They packed the trunk with whatever heavy junk they could find: spare cylinder heads, sandbags, transmissions, cranked the rear shocks tight and loosened the front. The result? A few inches of lift that with the right camera angle looked like a full-on launch. That illusion part, science part, movie magic gave Project X its most iconic shot. And when fans later tried to replicate it in real life, none of them could. Because their trunks weren't full of steel. 4. The blown small block reality. The movie made Project X sound like a fire-breathing monster, a 700 horsepower big block terror. But in truth, it was a modest roots-blown small block, maybe 350 cubic inches, making around 400 horsepower on its best day. The blower wasn't tuned for max power. It was tuned for noise and smoke. The pipes were open, the boost was light, and the camera did the rest. But that's what made it work. It wasn't about the dyno numbers. It was about the feeling. Every roar, every shift, every screech was the sound of possibility proof that you didn't need a supercar to feel like a king behind the wheel. Project X didn't represent perfection. It represented, you could build this. 3. Duke's on-screen ride. For Tony Danza, Hollywood Nights was just the start of a career. But for Duke, the character he played, Project X, was everything. It wasn't just transportation. It was identity. It was the proof that someone without privilege, without power, could still own something extraordinary. That's why the pairing worked. Tony Danza wasn't an actor pretending to be a hot rodder. He became one. He learned to drive stick on Project X, grinding gears and sweating through takes, feeling every vibration through the clutch. He reportedly loved the car so much he tried to buy it after filming, but couldn't afford it. And yet every time fans rewatch the movie, they can't separate the man from the machine. When you picture Project X, you see Danza's grin behind that wheel. And when you picture Danza, you hear that blown small block snarling back. 2. Not just a movie prop. Here's what most people never realize. Project X wasn't built for Hollywood Nights. It already had a 15-year career before the cameras rolled. Back in 1965, Popular Hot Rodding bought it from a Santa Monica lot for $250. They called it Project X because every magazine car needed a mysterious name, and this one became the most famous of them all. It was their test mule, their lab rat, their Frankenstein. Every new part, every crazy idea, every experiment got bolted onto it. Readers loved it because it was never finished, always evolving, always flawed, always real. It wasn't a showpiece. It was proof of work. And that's why when it finally rolled onto a movie set, it didn't feel like a Hollywood car. It felt like our car, the people's hot rod that made it to the big screen. 1. The working class hero. It was never a Bel Air. For decades, people have called Project X a 57 Bel Air. Car shows, fan pages, even TV hosts repeat it without thinking the most famous Bel Air ever. But here's the truth that every Tri-5 purist knows it's not a Bel Air at all. Never was. Project X is a humble 210 sedan, the mid-level trim built for working folks who couldn't afford the flashier Bel Air. No extra chrome, no fancy script on the rear quarters, just clean, honest lines and solid bones. That detail, that single overlooked fact, is what makes its story poetic. Because the car that came to symbolize American hot rodding wasn't born fancy. It became legendary. It's the underdog story in sheet metal form, the everyday car that outshined the ones built to be admired. Doctors drove Bel Airs. Dreamers drove 210s. And this 210 didn't just survive. It conquered Hollywood, outlasted generations, and inspired millions. Even today, people still call it a Bel Air, and maybe that's fine. Because in spirit, it became something bigger than a badge. And that is Project X. A car that began as a 250 experiment, a beat-up 57 Chevy, with nothing to prove, and somehow became the beating heart of hot rod history. It's been reborn again and again, from magazine mule to movie star, from electric silence to thunderous rebirth. Each era left a scar, a sound, a memory. It's outlasted its creators, outdriven its rivals, and outlived its own myth more times than anyone can count. When you see that glowing yellow paint under the sun, you're not just looking at steel and horsepower. You're looking at decades of obsession, of late-night garage dreams, of busted knuckles, of kids staring at posters thinking, maybe someday. And maybe that's why Project X endures. It reminds us that legends aren't born from perfection. They're built from persistence, from taking something ordinary and daring to make it extraordinary. So next time you hear that low growl in the distance, imagine it's Project X, still alive, still defiant, still yellow, and blown. Until next time, keep your wheels turning and your stories loud, because legends like this never stall, they just shift into the next gear.